Hey guys, welcome to our service. I'm so glad that you're tuning in today. If you didn't know, Church on the Move is a family of churches. We have 3 locations across Northeast Oklahoma. So if you live near one of our locations, come out and join us in person. We have incredible worship and teaching, and of course, amazing environments for kids and students that we want you and your family to experience for yourselves. If you have questions, you can drop a comment below or visit churchonthemove.com for more info. Now enjoy the service. And for us as a church, we're in this season that we call Advent. And so Advent is a season of waiting, and it's a season of expectation. And it's not about presents and meals and all those things. Those things are great, and we want you to go enjoy those and have a wonderful time with your family. But for us as a church, we're saying, hey, what does it look like to await and to expect the arrival of Jesus? And this happens in a couple different ways. First of all, we're remembering a few thousand years ago that Jesus came to this earth as a baby. And so it's like we're reflecting back to that time and saying, man, let's just imagine that he is arriving for the first time and how incredible that is. And what are the emotions? And we read the stories and we reflect on the fact that God became flesh and he dwelt among his people, and that's beautiful. But then we also say, but there's more to the story, and Jesus told us that he would come again. And that he will come at a second coming, and all things will be made right, and God will be united with his people. It's this beautiful moment. It's the culmination of the whole story. And so we look towards that and say, ooh, that's what we're really, really waiting for. Jesus coming was good news. When Jesus comes again, that is the best moment in history, because all things have been made right. And so in this season of Advent, we're discussing these different topics. If you haven't been here for the last few weeks, I'd encourage you, go on YouTube. We post all of our messages there. Just spend a little bit of time and see what Pastor Seth has been preaching about. We talked about hope, that, man, we need hope. And ultimately, our hope is in Jesus, that he is our true hope. And then last week, we talked about peace, that peace is possible. Maybe it doesn't feel like it. Maybe in this crazy world, you're like, I don't know that peace is even a thing anymore. And he said, yes, it is. It's difficult. We've got to fight for it, but peace is possible. And guess what? Peace is possible in Jesus. And today, we're talking about the idea of joy. And here's what I think is interesting about joy, is I think joy is a universal desire. I think that everybody, no matter your age, your gender, your race, your economic background, your politics, your religion, I think everybody likes joy. I mean, I don't know anybody who's like, I don't like to laugh. That's no fun, right? I don't enjoy that. Smiling's terrible. I don't want to do that. I think there may be some people who, because of what you've been told or experiences have happened to you, maybe you're not sure that you'll ever experience joy again in a deep and a true way. I think some of you, maybe because of shame in your life, maybe don't believe that you're deserving to experience joy. But I don't know anybody who just doesn't like the feeling of joy. In fact, if we scroll through Instagram, you're going to see people talking about choosing joy, right? Like, I don't care what my kids do today. I don't care what my coworkers do today. I'm going to choose joy, right? It's this thing that we've decided is important. It's valuable. We want to choose joy. Go to Hobby Lobby, and you're going to find some frame signs that you hang up on your wall, right? About joy, about choosing joy. It's something that we've all decided is a good thing. It's something that's honorable that we should have. And for those of us as followers of Jesus, we could look at that and say, okay, do people without Jesus really know what joy is? And can they even really experience joy? Or we could say, why is it that no matter where you're from and what your background is, that we desire joy? And I would say it's because it's something that God has placed inside of us. That God deep in us has placed this desire for joy, that we were made to experience joy, that you were created for joy. And that there's this longing in you to experience joy and to experience in the one who is the giver of joy, the one who is the creator of joy. But here's where the problem comes in, is often we look for joy in places that are flimsy and fleeting. We look for joy in all the wrong places. I don't know if this has ever happened to you. It's happened to me before, where somebody tells me like a new restaurant in town. They're like, oh, you got to go to this restaurant. It's incredible. The food is so good. The ambiance is incredible, right? The service is unbelievable. And so maybe my wife and I, we get a night free and we go, and they're right. The food is incredible. The ambiance is great, right? We have an incredible time. We have a great conversation, and then we leave. And I've literally had these thoughts before. Maybe it's just my broken brain. Maybe you don't think this way, but I've literally left and been like, man, that was really great, but like it didn't change my life, right? Like, great meal, but there's still laundry at home. I walked in the door, my kids are fighting with one another, right? Like was that a glimpse at joy? Was that a good moment? Yes. Is it lasting joy that I can cling to? No, that was just a moment. Maybe that's happened to you on vacation, right? You see somebody else post, oh, if I could just have some time off, if I could just go to that place, then I would be happy, right? My family, we took our first ever Isaac family beach vacation this year. We went down, it was beautiful. We had a great time. The kids played, we did all this stuff on the beach. It was great. And then we had a 12-hour drive home. And there was not joy in the van, okay? I can tell you. There was fighting, there was anger, and it's all that joy that we experienced at the beach. All of a sudden, it was fleeting and it was flimsy, right? It was gone as soon as we packed up and had to leave. Last time I preached, I talked about how we had this minivan. It was rough around the edges a little bit. And right after I preached, we had taken it into the shop, and we decided, due to the cost of repairing some things on it, that we would put the van out to the pasture. And so it's gone, and we had to buy a new to us SUV, and it's great, and it's like the nicest thing we've had, and it's got features and buttons and stuff that we've never had on a car before. But in the back of my mind, I go, man, yes, this thing brings me joy right now. When I get in it, it's like, this is nice and it's clean and it's wonderful. But I also know that in a few years and a few more miles, it's going to start to wear out, right? And those seats are going to get dirty. And then I'm going to start driving around and say, that car's nice. I bet that would bring me some joy, right? If I have that, we go to things. And again, these things momentarily, we do, I think, experience a glimpse of joy, but it's not long lasting. And here's what I would argue. I'd argue that often we go to things that are more about pleasure than they are about joy. And in fact, in the Greek, that's the language the New Testament is written in, whenever it distinguishes between pleasure and joy. And the word that they use for pleasure is actually where we get our word in English for hedonism. And what is hedonism except doing whatever makes me feel good, right? I'm going to do the things that I feel good, and I don't care about the consequences to anybody around me. I don't care how short-lived it is. As long as it feels good in this moment, I'm going to do it. And we have a culture that is built on experiences and feelings and hedonism of what is going to make me feel good right now. And that is not where we find lasting joy. And you may say, you know what, I've discovered this, Ryan. I've tried it. I've tried it through possessions and experiences and all that, and I realized it didn't last. And so now I'm focusing on things that are really lasting. And maybe that's purpose, or maybe that's work, or maybe that's your family or loved ones in your life. And I would say, once again, those things are great, and those things do bring us joy. But I would even argue that those are flimsy. And those are fleeting. My wife and I, we've been married for 12 years. I have an incredible wife. She is a gift to me. She is a gift to our family. My parents, they just celebrated 50 years of marriage. And my hope is that my wife and I will be married for another 40 plus years, that we'll get to celebrate that and more. Like, I want to grow old with her. I want to do life with her. But there's a part of me that understands that no matter what I do, no matter how well I treat her, I could shower her with gifts and praise and all those things. And there's still a chance that tomorrow she can run away to Hawaii with a boyfriend, right? Like, she can, I don't think she will, but there's a chance, right? I'm not in control of the decisions that she makes. That's one of the things so terrifying about relationships, right? We have this vision for our kids. We have 3 kids, and kind of the things I cling to is, okay, here's the end goal, is that our kids would grow up, that they would love the Lord, they would come members of society that, give to society and don't take away from it, and that they would be kids who, when they're adults, that they want to come back and they want to have brunch on a Saturday morning with mom and dad. That's the picture that I have, is that we would have a relationship that they still desire to be around us, and that they would bring home, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, kids, whatever phase of life they're in, and that they would want to be around mom and dad. And that's the desire, and that's the hope, and I think we can do everything we can as parents to try to foster that environment, but I also know they're going to grow up, and they're going to get to make their own decisions, and I'm not in control of those decisions that they make. And so if we begin to if I put all of my joy into relationships, and then all of a sudden that's pulled out from underneath me, well, where do I go? I mean, it's the whole story of Job in our Bible. If you've ever read Job, what is it except for a man who has everything? He has wealth, he has possessions, he has an abundant, beautiful family, he has health, and in a moment, all of it is taken away from him. And we get this picture of Job sitting on the ground in the worst case scenario, and he's faced with this decision, will I still praise God in the midst of this or not? That's the whole point of the book, and that's something for us to wrestle with is, if all of this was stripped away, where is my joy? You know, the story of Christmas is the story of Jesus arriving on the scene, and with Jesus comes joy. And so what we're going to do this morning, I was trying to decide, what should we look at? What passage? There's so many verses that talk about joy. There's so many places we could turn. And I was like, what's a good Christmas story that talks about the idea of joy? And I began to read stories, and I just found out, man, they can't help but talk about joy in these Christmas stories. So we're going to real quickly, instead of doing one story, we're going to move through some greatest hits of Christmas stories, okay? And we're going to see how joy is just laced into these stories. So the first story we get, it's in Luke chapter 1. And it's a birth announcement, but it's not the announcement of Jesus coming. So if you've read Luke's gospel, he actually tells the story about how there's this couple named Zechariah and Elizabeth. And Zechariah and Elizabeth, they get an angel that comes to them and tells them they're going to have a child. And this happens before Mary and Joseph find out about having Jesus. And so Luke chapter 1, this is what it says about Zechariah in this moment. Verse 11, it says, and there appeared to him an angel of the Lord standing to the right side of the altar of incense. Zechariah is a priest, and he's performing his priestly duties inside the temple. And Zechariah was troubled when he saw him, and fear fell upon him. But the angel said to him, do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer has been heard. And your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall call him John. And you will have joy and gladness. And many will rejoice. Many will give joy at his birth. Why? For he will be great before the Lord. If you don't know, this is the announcement of John the Baptist being born. And so John grows up. And why is it good news? Why is it such joy that John is being born? It's because John is going to pave the way for Jesus. He's going to go out in the wilderness, and he's going to preach, and he's going to baptize, and he's going to tell people to repent because Jesus is coming. And in fact, when Jesus begins his public ministry, he goes to John, and John baptizes him, and there's this beautiful moment. And so Luke is saying, hey, joy is coming because this guy, he is making the way for Jesus to come onto the scene. If we skip down a little bit, down to verse 39, we've jumped ahead in the story. So now Elizabeth is pregnant with John, just like the angel said. And then Mary has been told she's pregnant with Jesus, with the Lord. And so she's like, I got to go talk to somebody about this. So it says, in those days, Mary arose and went with haste into the hill country to a town in Judah. And she entered the house of Zechariah and greeted Elizabeth. And when Elizabeth heard the greeting of Mary, the baby leaped in her womb. And Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit, and she exclaimed with a loud cry, blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. And why is this granted to me that the mother of my Lord should come to me? For behold, when the sound of your greeting came to my ears, the baby in my womb leaped for joy. And blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what was spoken to her from the Lord. So imagine this scene. Mary comes in the door. She says, hey, Elizabeth, are you there? And we're told that this baby inside Elizabeth, just hearing the voice of the mother of the Lord, of hearing the voice of the mother of Jesus, this baby jumps, leaps within her womb with joy. Jesus hasn't even been born yet, right? John, he's not been born yet. Neither of them can even walk. They can't talk. They can't even feed themselves. And yet when John is in the presence of the mother of Jesus, when John is in the presence of Jesus, he leaps for joy. So Mary goes on and she sings this song. It's become a famous song. I'm just going to read the first line. So she says, my soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. We go to Luke chapter 2, maybe the most famous of all the Christmas story verses. Maybe you've read it, maybe you've heard it preached before, maybe you've watched Charlie Brown's Christmas special and heard it there. But it says, in the same region, there were shepherds out in the field keeping watch over their flock by night. And an angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were filled with a great fear. It's the same response as Zechariah, right? When we see an angel, we're filled with fear. And the angel said to them, fear not, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy And who's this great joy for? It is for all people. Hey, there's this baby that's been born, and we want you to know this is good news. And it's not just good news for shepherds. It's not just good news for the Jews. This is good news for everybody. It's not just Luke that hits on this. If we flip over to Matthew, we'll read one more story. Matthew chapter 2, he's talking about the wise men. We love to sing songs about the wise men. We put the wise men in our nativities, even though it's not historically accurate. All right, they had a long trip. It took them a long time to get there. So by the time they get to see Jesus, they've actually moved into a house. And they were following this star, but something happens in their journey where the star's not there anymore. So they go and they speak to the king. They speak to Herod, and they say, hey, we heard that there's a new king that's been born. Herod does not like this news. And so they have a conversation with him, and then they leave being with him. And it says in verse 9, it says, after listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose, it went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. I love the repetition in that verse. They give joy exceedingly because of their great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and they worshiped him. And then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. Why do they rejoice? Because there is a path that's being shown to them to get to Jesus. And it brings them great joy. And what do they do when they walk into the room? When they're in the presence of Jesus, what do? They fall down and they worship. Because it's the proper response when we're in the presence of Jesus to worship him. And then they open up and they give him extravagant gifts. We're told that Jesus was a gift given to us, and they respond by giving him gifts back. And it's so clear, the biblical authors over and over, they want us to know that the arrival of Jesus is good news, and the proper response to this good news is joy. That we should be filled with joy. Why? Because joy is found in Jesus. If we want true lasting joy that's not bound to our circumstances, joy that's not going to change when things in our life change, joy that is a foundation that we can build on, joy that is the same yesterday, today, and forever. If we want that kind of joy, it's found in the person of Jesus. And I think for those of us who are Christians, it's like, yes and amen, that is true. We believe that. Yes, that's what we're building our foundation on. But and every time I preach, I feel like there's a moment of what I read in Scripture and what it says, and then what my life looks like and what I run into. Sometimes these things, they feel like they crash into one another. And just in examining my life, I go, whew, I'm not joyful 100% of the time. I don't know that I'm joyful 50% of the time. 30, 20, 10. Yeah, I don't know what that number is, but I know that there's not just increasing, overwhelming joy all the time. And if there ever should be joy, there should be joy at Christmas, right? I mean, this should be the time that we are just filled with this good news that Jesus has come. And to quote the great Ellen Griswold, she says, I don't know what to say, except it's Christmas and we're all in misery, right? Sometimes that's more of what it feels like than joy. But I think it's fair for us as Christians to say, what are we supposed to do with this? This idea that, man, joy has arrived, it is here, and yet I don't always experience that. I looked at the words of Paul. Paul's one of the guys who writes in the New Testament, and what he says is, hey, we should rejoice at all times. Don't ever stop. Keep rejoicing. You look at the life of Paul, the dude was shipwrecked, he was beaten, he was bit by a snake, he was thrown into jail. Like, Paul had a rough life, and his response is to say, we should rejoice in all circumstances all the time. We turn to James. What does James says? James says, hey, brothers, rejoice when you face trials of many kinds. Specifically talking about when you face opposition, when you face people who are against you because of your faith, because of your beliefs, because you've given your life to Jesus. When you face that, you should rejoice. That is good. And I'm like, I wish that wasn't in there, right? Some of these verses, they're not very fun. What does it look like for us to become people who more and more experience joy and have joy in every single moment. And here's why I think Paul and James and other New Testament writers, they write about this joy, is because, yes, there was joy in the fact that Jesus came and he was born. That's why we celebrate Christmas. That was good news, and there was joy in that. But for them, their joy is really found in the fact that that baby that came, well, he came and he lived for us and he taught us, but then he died on the cross for you and for me, and he was resurrected. That he came back, and with him, we now have access to new life because he was resurrected. We can join in the resurrection with him. And that's what they're staking all of their hope on, is what Jesus has done. And then again, we're looking ahead to, okay, one day he's ultimately going to come back. And yes, we don't experience hope on a daily basis now, but it will be fulfilled in Jesus. Yes, we don't experience peace on a daily basis, but it will be fulfilled in Jesus. Yes, we don't experience joy on a daily basis, but it will be fulfilled in Jesus. So what do we do in this in-between? What do we do between knowing what Jesus has done for us and then the ultimate fulfillment of that joy? And I think what these authors are hitting at is we should be people who are practicing joy. That we should be choosing to, as cliche as I made fun of Instagram and signs, we should be choosing joy, but we should be choosing it with the right focus because of who God is and because what he has done for us. And here's what I believe. I believe that when we practice joy in our best moments, when things are going well, when work is good, when family's good, when finances, health, whatever it is, when those things are good, man, we should be practicing joy, because then whenever you're in the moments when things are not as good, when things are difficult and hard, you have created this pattern, this practice of joy in your life that will come out in those moments when it's difficult, those moments when maybe you don't want to express your joy. You don't want to even think about joy, but man, you've made it such a habit, you've ingrained it into who you are that it will just come out of you in those difficult, dark moments of your life. So how do we create that pattern? How do we create that habit in our life? And as I was studying through just all the different ways that the Hebrew and the Greek, they talk about joy. One thing that just stood out to me, this is elementary. This is not like a profound thing. It's just, it helps begin to kind of shape how we should respond. Is the word joy is pretty much used in one of two ways. And so I want to talk about both of those ways, because I think it will shape how we should view and how we should respond to joy. So the first thing is that joy is an emotion. All right, this is elementary. We learned this a long time ago at a young age, but joy it's an emotion. It's something we feel, right? And some of you in this room, you are feelers. Like you feel all the emotions, and I see some husbands like, that's her, right? They're like, we feel all the emotions, and you have your cup of coffee in the morning, you're like, oh, joy, right? Like you feel it deep in your bones. You're curled up under a blanket with a good book, and this is joy. Like your kids are playing sports, and this is just the greatest thing that's ever happened, right? That is a gift to experience emotion so deeply. But I would also say, if that's true of you, you probably also experience negative emotions, probably in a deep way. Hurts and pains and sadness. And I'd wonder for you, what's it like to both experience the highs of joy, but then also to say, how can I be joyful in these moments when it's so difficult and so painful and so hard? For me, I would maybe be the other end of the spectrum, where sometimes it's like, okay, I know I've got emotions in here, but they're a little bit hard to access sometimes. I tend to use this more than I use my heart. And so how can I do that? I have a distinct memory of a Christmas one time. I was in junior high. My parents got me this present. It was an incredible gift. And I remember being so blown away that they sacrificed, that they got me this thing that it must have taken a lot of work. And it was just above and beyond. It was so incredible. And I remember unwrapping it and seeing it. And this is a literal thoughts that were going through my head was, wow, this is amazing. I'm so thankful. How do I show that with my face and with my words? Because I don't know how to do that. And maybe for some of you, you're more on that end. And so I think for us, it's like, okay, how do we become people who say, God, I want to experience joy, and I want to experience it in a deeper, in a more meaningful way, maybe than I ever have before. But I think no matter what your temperament is, no matter where you would be at on that scale of feelings and emotions, I think the temptation is we think of joy as an emotion, and so it's something that we're not in control of. That it's gonna come, and if we experience it, then I have joy. And if circumstances and life around me is bad, well, then I don't have any control of that. And so I will just be joyful if good things happen to me. And I would just argue and say, what would it look like for us to try to find moments of joy no matter the circumstances, no matter what's going on? Like how could we do that? You know, one thing that we've had happen in our life, and maybe this annoys my wife, I'm not sure, but we'll have a car repair, and car repairs are the worst, right? Like, you're spending money for this thing that already costs a lot of money. I hate them, but there's been moments where we have a big car repair, and I'll just say, hey, you know what the good news is? We have money to pay for this. Like, thank God that we have money in our savings, that he has been good to us, he has provided for us, he's given us wisdom to save, to be prepared for this moment. Do I want to write this check? No, but man, God is good in the midst of this. What's it look like to look for those moments of joy? And I think moments of joy can come in something simple. Like, I joked about you sipping your coffee and finding joy, but man, like, what if that is, like, when you have your morning coffee, you're like, oh, God is so good. And I think that's the key. I think the key is for us not to just find joy in these temporary moments and things, but for us to dig underneath that a little bit more and say, how do I see and experience God in the midst of this? Like, as we're enjoying a cup of coffee, it's like, man, God created this plant that has these beans, and people learned to harvest it, and they learned to roast it, and then they learned to grind it, and what temperature to put it at, and now we have this beautiful gift. Like, this is amazing. We begin to not be so thankful for this thing, this material thing or this experience, but the one who made it and created it. How do we become people that have that lens to say, man, God, I want to see you, and I want to be grateful for you in every single moment. So that's the first thing, is that joy is an emotion, but I don't think we stop there. I think joy is an expression. It's why it's the same word throughout the Bible that sometimes it's translated joy, but sometimes it's translated rejoice, right? That we've got to get this, like, we've got to do something with this joy. We've got to say it, we've got to speak it, we've got to sing it, we've got to give it to somebody else. Man, it's this overflowing. This has to come out of us somewhere. And what would it look like for us to become people who speak joy, who are sharing joy, who it's flowing out of us in all circumstances? But here's what I think we tend to happen. Again, we think an emotion is something that happens to us. And so step one is we have to feel joy. And then step two is then I can speak it, or then I can express my joy. And again, I would say, what would it look like if just no matter what, we chose to express our joy? And I don't mean that in an inauthentic way. I don't mean that you should lie or be fake. I just think it would say, hey, what would it look like for you to just choose to say, man, in this moment, things aren't going the way that I want, but man, I'm gonna find something that I'm grateful for. I'm gonna find something, I'm gonna choose it, and I'm gonna literally speak the words to say how grateful I am to God, to express this. Because here's what I believe happens. I believe that when we begin to speak something, that it has power. There are power in words, I think, far more than we can understand. Read James. James talks about the power of our words. They can bring life and they can bring death. And I think when we begin to speak joy, whether we are feeling it or not, that I think emotions begin to well up in us, and all of a sudden we actually are experiencing the emotion of joy more and more. And so there's this, it becomes not a step one and step two, it becomes this cyclical thing where because I'm speaking it now, I actually have more emotions that I'm feeling, and now I actually have more to express because I'm feeling more things than I was, and all of a sudden these things begin to feed one another. I think about worship. Whenever there's times when I've come into this room where I'm tired, my focus is off, whatever, and it's like, I don't really want to sing worship songs today. I'm a pastor, I'm paid to be here, right? Like it's a terrible thing to say, right? But that's human emotion. Sometimes I don't want to do it, but guess what? I've created a pattern and a habit that says I'm going to come in and I'm going to do it whether I want to or not. And maybe that feels inauthentic to you. For me, it's just saying, no, this is a discipline. And guess what? When I choose to sing those words, when I choose to raise my hands, something begins to happen. God begins to use those things. It also begins to shape and change what's happening on the inside of me because I have chosen to worship him. And what would we be like if we were people who are choosing to speak joy, to express our joy no matter what's going on? There's this beautiful quote that I read from this lady. Her name's Robbie Tasselman. She says, joy's best expression of gratitude is the most counter-cultural voice that must be heard in a world filled with a cacophony of complaint. The world needs your joy. We live in a world that is desperate. I've just felt the heaviness of, man, we have a world that needs joy. We have a world that needs a church, that needs followers of Jesus that are full of joy. Think about this. Think about if you go into work every day and you're grumpy and you're complaining and that person knows you're a follower of Jesus, they're gonna say, well, I don't need any more of that, right? I have enough of that in my life. Evidently what they're doing is not working, but if they see you walk in and you're just filled with this joy that maybe it's tied to what's going on in your life. Maybe like, yes, you should have joy because, man, your family's incredible. And man, you've got this great thing going at work. And you know, I don't know if I believe in your God, but he seems to be providing for you and things seem to be going well. But then also imagine you walk in and they're looking at your life saying, I don't know why you're happy today because I've seen what's going on in your family. I've seen what's happening in your health. I've seen what's going on, but you seem to have joy in the midst of that. Why is that? What do you know that I don't know? What are you experiencing that I'm not experiencing? I think we're in a world that is desperate to see somebody that has joy, that has lasting, meaningful joy, and that joy is found in Jesus.